The courtroom sat in near total silence, the kind where even the faint buzz of recording equipment felt loud. Opposite Judge Judy was a woman whose confidence bordered on blinding arrogance. Her name was Victoria Haynes, a 38-year-old CEO running a tech empire worth billions. Moments earlier, she had boldly claimed she stood above ordinary people, almost like a god. Less than a minute later, that same woman would be shaking, mascara smeared across her face, as Judge Judy dismantled her illusion of power with razor-sharp precision. Before the gavel could strike and before the room could react, Victoria's smug expression practically invited confrontation. "I don't answer to you," she said coolly, her voice soaked in superiority. "I make the rules. People like you follow them." The audience leaned in, caught between shock and fascination. They had seen arrogance before, but never something this polished, this fearless. Judge Judy remained completely unfazed. Her eyes locked onto Victoria with the focus of a predator. "You may run a company," she said calmly, "but in my courtroom I run you." What followed would become one of the most replayed courtroom moments ever broadcast. Within days, clips would flood social media, pulling in tens of millions of views. Headlines would describe it as the moment ego met its downfall. Yet no one watching that day realized Judge Judy already held an advantage. She knew something Victoria didn't. Something hidden deep within corporate records and sworn statements, something powerful enough to shatter her empire before the episode even aired. What unfolded next was more than a case. It was a collision between unchecked pride and undeniable accountability. For those who believe justice has a way of humbling even the most powerful, this was a moment that would leave a lasting impression. And what Judge Judy would uncover about Victoria Haynes would challenge everything people thought they understood about influence, privilege, and the limits of authority. That morning, before the cameras began rolling, the production team had expected a routine dispute. Something simple, just another small claims case to fill airtime between ordinary disagreements. Instead, they were met with a defendant who arrived like a celebrity walking a red carpet. Victoria Haynes, founder and CEO of Hans Dynamics, stepped out of a sleek black Rolls-Royce wearing a perfectly tailored white suit that cost more than most annual salaries. Camera flashes bounced off the diamonds on her wrist as she acknowledged onlookers. News had spread quickly that a young, self-made tech billionaire would appear in Judge Judy's courtroom, and Victoria clearly enjoyed the attention. Inside, the atmosphere told a very different story. At the plaintiff's table sat Elena Brooks, a soft-spoken systems engineer who had been with Hans Dynamics since its early days. She wasn't wealthy or well-known, and she clearly felt uncomfortable under the glare of cameras. All she wanted was the $48,000 bonus she had been promised after identifying a major cybersecurity vulnerability, one that could have cost clients millions. Instead of being rewarded, she was dismissed within 2 days. Officially, it was labeled a breach of confidentiality. In reality, she had embarrassed her CEO. Elena kept her eyes fixed on the papers in her trembling hands, while across the room Victoria casually checked her reflection, treating the courtroom like a stage. To her, this wasn't a legal proceeding. It was an opportunity to showcase her dominance. The bailiff's voice cut cleanly through the murmurs. "I'll rise." Judge Judy entered with measured authority, her gaze sweeping across the room with sharp awareness. The audience stood as one, anticipation building. She took her seat, tapped the gavel once, and silence instantly followed. The clerk began case number 1187. Elena Brooks versus Hans Dynamics Incorporated, represented by CEO Victoria Haynes. As Judge Judy reviewed the file, her expression subtly tightened. She had handled countless employment disputes, but it was rare to see a billionaire executive personally defending a case in small claims court. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "you're seeking unpaid compensation tied to a security discovery." "Yes, Your Honor," Elena replied quietly. "They promised a bonus if vulnerabilities were identified before launch. I found one and they refused to pay." Judge Judy turned her attention to Victoria. "Ms. Haynes, you're representing your company yourself." Victoria's smile was polished but distant. "Of course. I don't need attorneys to speak for me. I'm more than capable of defending my own empire." The word lingered in the air, empire. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow slightly. "Empire. We'll see." What no one in the room yet realized was that this so-called empire was already beginning to fracture. Several board members had quietly stepped down. Regulators had started examining the company's financial behavior. And this very dispute, seemingly small, was about to expose something far more serious than a withheld bonus. Judge Judy sensed it almost immediately. Years on the bench had sharpened her instincts. She could detect dishonesty as clearly as a trained hound detects fear. She didn't have every detail yet, but she knew one thing for certain. The woman standing before her wasn't just overconfident. She was hiding something significant. So when Victoria flashed that confident smile and remarked, "I'm looking forward to showing you how corporate law really works," Judge Judy leaned back slightly, folding her hands with calm amusement. "I always enjoy learning," she replied, her tone light but pointed, especially from people who think they're gods. A quiet ripple of laughter moved through the room. Victoria didn't react. The camera zoomed in on her unwavering smirk, unaware that behind the scenes, Judge Judy's team had already begun uncovering critical information. By the time the case concluded, that confidence would unravel into something very different. Long before Victoria Haynes ever stepped into that courtroom, Judge Judy's research team had spent days reviewing public filings, financial records, and testimonies from former employees, piecing together a story that was far from what it appeared to be. From the very beginning, something about the case didn't sit right. It was highly unusual for a billionaire to show up personally in small claims court over just 48,000. The numbers didn't make sense, and Judge Judy understood that when finances seem off, the real drivers are often power and ego. As her team investigated further, things became even more unsettling. On the surface, Hans Dynamics was praised as a Silicon Valley success story, a company claiming to revolutionize cybersecurity with supposedly unbreakable AI systems. But internally, the records painted a completely different picture. Unexpected layoffs, delayed salaries, and mysterious financial transfers funneled through offshore entities in places like Luxembourg and Singapore. Then came the whistleblower messages. Anonymous accounts from former engineers described a toxic environment built on fear, where Victoria ruled through pressure and humiliation. One message stood out in particular. She calls herself a god in the office. She says people should feel lucky just to be in her presence. That line stuck with Judge Judy. And when Victoria echoed a similar sentiment during pre-trial interviews, saying, "In my company, I'm the creator, and creators don't owe explanations to their creations," it confirmed exactly what kind of personality she was dealing with. Judge Judy had encountered this type before, the executive who confuses success with entitlement, who starts to believe their authority is absolute. And she already had a strategy in mind. While Victoria's PR team prepared polished statements for the cameras, Judge Judy's assistant, Officer Bird, quietly delivered a sealed envelope to the bench on the morning of the hearing. Inside was a confidential statement from Hans Dynamics' former CFO. It was explosive. A signed affidavit revealing that Victoria had personally instructed that bonuses be withheld from employees who failed to show unwavering loyalty. The final line in the statement read, "She doesn't see employees as people, only as tools, and tools don't deserve rewards." Judge Judy gave no visible reaction. She calmly placed the document back into the envelope and set it beside the case file, concealing its significance in plain sight. By the time the cameras started recording and Victoria began presenting herself with flawless confidence and rehearsed poise, Judge Judy already knew the outcome was inevitable. It wasn't a question of whether Victoria's image would collapse, but when. From her seat, Judge Judy observed every detail. The way Victoria interrupted Elena, the dismissive gestures, the self-satisfied smile whenever the audience reacted. None of it was written evidence, but it spoke volumes. Judge Judy approached the situation like a strategist, always thinking several steps ahead. She chose not to challenge Victoria right away. Instead, she allowed her to speak, to boast, to grow comfortable in her own certainty. And just when that confidence reached its peak, she would reveal everything. Meanwhile, Elena Brooks sat quietly, unaware that the situation was slowly turning in her favor. She had been warned that the company's legal team might try to paint her as bitter or dishonest, perhaps even accuse her of sabotage, but she didn't realize that Judge Judy had already seen through the entire corporate facade. Outside in the hallway, the show's producers exchanged quiet comments. One of them remarked, "She's intimidating," referring to Victoria. Another added, "Did you notice how she spoke to the cameraman, like he worked for her?" The response came quickly, "Just wait. Once Judge Judy steps in, this won't end the way she expects." And that prediction was accurate. Victoria Haynes may have entered the courtroom expecting to humiliate a former employee, but Judge Judy had come prepared to deliver a lesson, one that would resonate far beyond that room. As Judge Judy often said, power without integrity eventually leads to consequences. And that moment was approaching fast. If Victoria represented the storm, Elena was the calm that came before it, a quiet presence carrying years of struggle beneath the surface. The camera lingered on her as she adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling slightly while holding a worn folder with frayed edges. Inside it were the remnants of 2 years of her life, late-night emails, signed agreements, and the final message that had ended her career. For Elena, this case was no longer about money. It was about reclaiming her sense of self-respect. Before Hans Dynamics grew into a billion-dollar company, it had started with just 5 people working in a small rented garage. Elena had been one of them. She helped build the foundation, writing the core code that powered the company's first AI-driven security system, the very innovation that attracted investors. When Victoria once spoke about changing the world, Elena believed her completely. She poured everything into that vision: long hours, missed holidays, nights spent debugging systems until sunrise. Her motivation was simple: the promise that success would be shared by everyone. But once the company reached its first billion-dollar valuation, that promise disappeared. Salary increases stopped. Bonuses were delayed indefinitely. And when Elena reported a serious flaw in their main product, one that could have compromised the personal data of millions, she wasn't rewarded. She was singled out. Victoria publicly criticized her in front of the entire engineering team. "You made me look incompetent," she said. "Do you understand who I am? I built this company. I am this company. You don't challenge God in her own domain." Those words stayed with Elena. Within 2 days, her access was revoked, her email erased, and her reputation quietly undermined with accusations of disloyalty. The severance she was owed never arrived, and neither did the bonus she had earned. So when Judge Judy asked her to explain her side, Elena hesitated at first, her voice unsteady. "Your Honor, I was one of the first employees. I believed in the company and in her vision. I didn't even think about the money in the beginning. I just wanted to be part of something meaningful. But every time I chose to do the right thing, I paid the price for it." Judge Judy gave a small nod, her expression focused yet understanding. "Did you receive anything in writing about this bonus?" "Yes, Your Honor." Elena quickly searched through her folder and pulled out a printed memo bearing Victoria's signature. The wording was clear. Employees on the security team who identified major vulnerabilities before launch would receive a 48,000 retention bonus. Judge Judy studied the document carefully, then looked up. "Is this your signature?" Victoria gave a faint, dismissive smile. "It could be. I sign countless documents. That doesn't mean every single one is applicable. We have internal guidelines. Context matters. Context." Judy repeated thoughtfully, placing the paper down. "That's an interesting choice of words, because in this situation, it looks very much like a commitment." A quiet murmur moved through the room. Victoria simply crossed her legs unfazed. "Commitments are for employees who remain loyal, Judge. Loyalty isn't something you buy, it's something you earn." That was the moment Elena's composure finally broke. "I was loyal," she said, her voice shaking. "I worked weekends. Holidays. I gave everything to that company. And when I found a flaw that could have ruined it, I reported it. I didn't expose it. I protected it." Her voice cracked as tears slipped through. The cameras moved in closer, capturing every raw, unfiltered emotion. For several seconds, Judge Judy remained silent, watching Elena closely, the same way she had observed countless individuals who had been worn down by systems designed to favor those in power. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried weight. "Miss Brooks, you don't have to defend your integrity. The issue isn't what you did. The issue is that you did it in an environment where authority mistakes obedience for respect." A low wave of reaction passed through the courtroom. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Let's not turn this into a lecture. She breached confidentiality, damaged investor confidence, and now she's emotional on television to gain sympathy. That's all this is." But the room no longer saw weakness. They saw strength. A woman standing up to the person who had pushed her aside and finally refusing to stay silent. Judge Judy saw it clearly. The atmosphere had shifted. Victoria still believed she was in control, but everyone else could sense it. Her position was already beginning to unravel. Victoria Haynes didn't just act like she was above the law. She believed she defined it. As Elena wiped her tears, Victoria leaned back comfortably, crossing her legs with practiced ease, like someone posing for a magazine cover. The light caught her diamond bracelet, scattering reflections across the courtroom. "Your Honor," she began, her tone smooth but edged with coldness. "I understand that people get emotional when they lose their jobs. But business isn't about emotions, it's about outcomes. And frankly, Miss Brooks had become a risk. If I hadn't removed her, she could have undone years of progress. I protected my company. I protected my employees. That's leadership." Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, studying her with quiet intensity. "Leadership," she repeated. "That's one way to define it." But Victoria wasn't finished. She adjusted her blazer and continued, slipping into a speech that sounded more like self-praise than defense. "You see, Judge, individuals like me, innovators, we don't operate within ordinary limits. I built something from nothing. I created opportunities, jobs, technology that keeps people safe. So if someone accuses me over something as insignificant as a bonus, you'll have to forgive me if I don't take it seriously. I don't owe appreciation to employees who work against me." A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Even the bailiff glanced over, surprised. Victoria, however, misread the reaction entirely, taking it as admiration. "I'm not here to be liked," she added with a smirk. "I'm here because I thought this would be interesting, educational for your viewers." The way she said, "your viewers," carried a clear note of condescension. Judge Judy didn't respond right away. She leaned back slightly, tapping her pen against the bench in a steady rhythm. Every pause, every movement was deliberate. She had encountered people like Victoria before, those who confuse arrogance with intelligence and harshness with strength. They always began by dominating the room, and they always ended very differently. Victoria kept going, now emphasizing her words with dramatic gestures of her perfectly manicured hands. "I have entire legal departments handling serious cases," she said. "But this is more like a show. Good for public image. People get to see what a confident, successful woman looks like when she refuses to be pushed around by the system." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The level of arrogance was almost overwhelming. "You keep mentioning the system," Judge Judy replied calmly. "Which system exactly are you talking about?" "The one that resents people like me," Victoria answered without hesitation. "Powerful women, innovators, we make people uncomfortable, especially those who've never achieved anything significant." The implication lingered in the air. For the first time, Judge Judy's eyes sharpened slightly. "Are you suggesting that I'm intimidated by you, Miss Haynes?" Victoria tilted her head, offering a sugary smile. "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm sure you've done quite well for your generation." A sharp intake of breath echoed from the gallery. Even Elena looked stunned. Judge Judy didn't react outwardly. She didn't have to. Her stillness carried more weight than any outburst could. But Victoria misread that silence as a win. She turned slightly toward the camera, smiling to herself as if she had just secured a viral moment. Yet beneath that smile, small cracks were beginning to show. The camera caught the faint tension in her jaw, the barely noticeable tremble in her fingers. Deep down, even Victoria could feel it. The shift in the room. Judge Judy's expression remained unreadable, calm to the point of being almost immovable. But her mind was already several steps ahead. She had encountered arrogance in many forms, but this was something else entirely. Delusion wrapped in ambition. "Miss Haynes," she said at last, her voice steady and precise, "in this courtroom you are not a CEO, a visionary, or anything close to a deity. You are a defendant. And when defendants lie, manipulate, or talk down to others, they don't intimidate me. They amuse me." The audience burst into applause before the bailiff quickly restored order. Victoria blinked, momentarily thrown off, but quickly regained her composure. "I'm not lying, Judge," she said coolly. "I don't need to. I define my own truth." That statement would later echo everywhere, across headlines, social media, and endless commentary. It would be analyzed, debated, and replayed as the defining line of her downfall. But in that moment inside that courtroom, it was simply fuel. And Judge Judy was ready to ignite it. Judge Judy had spent more years in courtrooms than many watching had been alive. She had seen arrogance take many forms: the smooth-talking manipulator, the deceptive victim, the calculated opportunist. But Victoria Haynes stood apart. Her arrogance wasn't just a defense mechanism. It was something she fully believed in. From the second Victoria entered, Judge Judy had been quietly observing, noting every detail like evidence: the subtle eye rolls when Elena spoke, the carefully timed smiles toward the camera, the constant redirection of attention back to herself. It all pointed to one thing: a belief that power placed her above consequences. Over decades, Judge Judy had learned that the more people like this spoke, the more they revealed. Their own words became their undoing. And as Victoria continued her confident monologue, Judge Judy could already see exactly where it would break. She had once told her producers, "Give them enough time, and they'll expose themselves." That's exactly what she was allowing to happen. She had seen it all: executives pretending ignorance, landlords twisting facts, fraudsters shedding fake tears when caught. But this was different. This was someone who truly believed she was beyond accountability. To the public, Judge Judy might have been a television personality, but beneath that image was a sharp legal mind shaped in some of the toughest courtrooms in New York. She had faced down dangerous individuals, chronic liars, and people convinced they could outtalk justice, and none of them ever succeeded. So when Victoria said, "I define my own truth," Judge Judy remained outwardly calm. But internally, she recognized it instantly. That single sentence told her everything she needed to know. Because the kind of arrogance that convinces someone they can rewrite reality always ends the same way: with collapse. Her eyes briefly moved to the sealed envelope resting beside her. Inside were financial records, whistleblower accounts, and the former CFO's sworn statement. Every piece ready to be revealed at the right moment. But she wasn't going to rush it. Justice wasn't only about facts. It was also about timing. Her plan was already unfolding. She would let Victoria continue, let her dig deeper, until there was no way out. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the audience. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others leaned forward, drawn in by the spectacle of watching someone powerful unravel. But Judge Judy wasn't focused on spectacle. She was focused on principle. Her entire career had been built on one belief: the law treats everyone the same. It doesn't care about wealth, titles, or ego. It only cares about what's right and what's wrong. And in her courtroom, crossing that line always comes with consequences. She held her gaze on Victoria a moment longer. The woman kept talking, still trying to turn the hearing into her own lesson on leadership. But to Judy, it sounded less like confidence and more like desperation dressed up in polished words. "Do you know what I find interesting, Miss Haynes?" Judy cut in at last, her voice calm but edged with something sharper. "People who think they're untouchable usually say that right before reality proves them wrong." Victoria let out a small laugh, assuming it was humor. "Judge with respect. I've dealt with regulators, investors, even politicians. They all try to control people like me. It never works." "Oh, I'm not trying to control you," Judy replied quietly. "I'm trying to understand how someone convinces herself that basic ethics don't apply to her." The atmosphere shifted again, subtle, but undeniable. Even Victoria's PR manager behind her shifted uneasily. Those familiar with Judge Judy knew that when her tone became this measured, this calm, it wasn't peace. It was a warning. As Victoria launched into yet another speech about independence and vision, Judy's eyes briefly moved to the sealed envelope on her desk. She didn't open it, but her fingers rested lightly on it, like someone ready to reveal something decisive. Inside that envelope was the truth, the kind that could dismantle everything Victoria believed about herself, and it was only a matter of time before Judy decided to use it. For now, she remained patient. Justice, as she often believed, wasn't about speed, it was about impact. And when this moment arrived, it would land with undeniable force. The camera swept across the courtroom as tension built into something almost electric. The audience could feel it, like the air before a storm breaks. Judge Judy sat still behind the bench, her gavel resting lightly in her hand. The bailiff gave a subtle nod toward the producer. A red light flicked on. "They were live." "This is where we begin," Judge Judy said, her voice carrying both authority and warning. "Miss Brooks, you've presented your side. Now we'll hear from the defendant." Victoria Haynes stood with practiced precision, smoothing her designer skirt as if stepping onto a stage rather than into scrutiny. She carried herself as though she controlled the entire room, her posture radiating confidence, her expression carefully tailored for the cameras. When she spoke, it sounded more like a keynote address than testimony. "Your Honor," she began with a polished smile, "thank you for allowing me to speak. I know your time is valuable, and I respect it. I only wish everyone here showed the same consideration." The remark was subtle, but it landed. Elena lowered her gaze, pressing her lips together, while a faint murmur moved through the audience. Judy's brow tightened just slightly, enough to show she noticed. Victoria continued, "This case isn't about bonuses or broken agreements. It's about performance and accountability. When I founded Hands Dynamics, I built it from nothing based on my vision. That's not arrogance. It's reality. And I won't allow dissatisfied former employees, people who couldn't keep up, to rewrite my narrative." "Rewrite your narrative?" Judy asked, almost amused. "Yes, Your Honor," Victoria replied, her tone firm, almost indignant. "People like Miss Brooks expect rewards for average work. They confuse following instructions with making real contributions. And when they're finally held accountable, suddenly they become victims." "Held accountable how?" Judy asked. "But terminating them without compensation after they identified a security flaw that could have cost your clients millions." Victoria gave a small, dismissive laugh. "That's not how innovation works, Your Honor. You can't penalize a company for making executive decisions." Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "Executive decisions that override contractual obligations." "I didn't violate anything," Victoria replied quickly. "I adjusted expectations. That's leadership, and if people want to cast me as the villain, fine. Villains build empires while others complain about fairness." A heavy silence filled the courtroom. The arrogance was undeniable. Judy tapped her pen once, then again, the sound echoing like a countdown. "Miss Haynes," she said slowly, "you seem to think you're giving a business lecture." Victoria smirked. "And you seem to think this isn't about facts." "I'm always ready to deal with facts." "Good," Judy replied. "Then let's look at one." She lifted a document from Elena's file, a printed email chain. "This is an internal message you sent on March 17, 2023. The subject line reads, 'Silencing the security team.' Would you like me to read it out loud?" For a brief second, Victoria's composure faltered, but she quickly recovered with a tight smile. "I send many emails, Your Honor. Context is important." "I'm sure it is," Judy said evenly. "Because in this one, you wrote, 'No one undermines me and my company. If they question me again, they're gone.'" She looked up, her gaze sharp. "Did you write that, Miss Haynes?" Victoria hesitated, then answered, "I might have, but you're taking it out of context. It was internal communication, motivation, not a threat." Judy's voice dropped slightly. "It sounds like intimidation to me." A murmur spread through the room again. Victoria's jaw tightened. "You're misreading my tone." Judy responded dryly, "I've been interpreting tone longer than you've been giving interviews." Laughter broke out across the gallery before the bailiff restored order. For the first time, Victoria looked unsettled. Her posture stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Still, she forced another composed smile, trying to regain control. Your Honor, with respect, you can't run a billion-dollar company by asking for permission every time someone's feelings get hurt. I won't apologize for being strong. Judy's gaze stayed fixed, unblinking. Strength is admirable, she said evenly, but cruelty is something entirely different. Cruel? Victoria shot back, her voice rising. Do you have any idea what it takes to live my life? The pressure, the sacrifices, the expectations. People admire success from a distance, but the moment they face it, they call it arrogance. Judy leaned back slightly, studying her. And when they stop admiring you, you start calling yourself God. A wave moved through the courtroom. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate for a beat. Victoria stiffened, her smile slipping for just a moment. Excuse me. Judy's tone didn't change. I said, you refer to yourself as God. Isn't that what you told your employees? Victoria opened her mouth, then paused. That's being twisted. It's out of context. Context, Judy repeated calmly. Funny how that word shows up right before the truth does. A few quiet laughs broke the tension, but Victoria didn't join in. Her eyes flicked toward her PR manager, who quickly looked away. The confidence that once filled the room was beginning to thin. Judy gathered her papers, tapping them into place. We'll take a 5-minute recess, she announced. There's something I'd like to review before we continue. The gavel struck with finality. As murmurs spread across the courtroom, Victoria turned sharply to her assistant. Get me the PR memo, she whispered urgently. Now. Across the room, Elena sat still, gripping her folder. For the first time since everything began, a small smile appeared on her face. She could see it now, the cracks forming, and Judy had only just started. When the court resumed, the tension felt heavier, almost suffocating. 5 minutes had passed, but for Victoria it felt much longer. She had spent that time pacing in tight circles, whispering intensely with her PR consultant, and rehearsing her composed expression in the reflection of a water pitcher. All rise. Victoria straightened instantly, resetting her posture. She believed she was ready again, at least on the surface. Judy re-entered, carrying not just the same folder from before, but another file the cameras hadn't seen yet. Her expression was controlled, unreadable, almost dangerous. Victoria lifted her chin, flashing the same polished smile seen on magazine covers and investor presentations. She even gave a small, confident wave toward the gallery, as if to signal that everything remained under control. Be seated, Judy said, her voice cool and clipped. She opened the new file, flipping through several pages before looking up. Miss Haynes, she began. Before the recess, you claimed your statement about being God was misunderstood. Do you still stand by that? Absolutely. Victoria replied without hesitation. It was a metaphor. Motivational language taken too literally. It sounds ridiculous when you twist it. It certainly does, Judy replied, a trace of irony in her voice. But here's the issue. She lifted a document from the file. The court received a statement this morning from a former employee, an HR director at Hands Dynamics. She describes a mandatory company meeting held on January 8, 2023. Does that date ring a bell? Victoria's expression flickered. We have countless meetings. I can't remember every detail. Oh, I think this one will come back to you, Judy said. Because during that meeting, you allegedly stood in front of your staff and said, "There are no gods above me. I create your success. I decide who rises and who falls." An audible gasp rippled through the room. Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted between Judy and the cameras, searching for a way to recover. That's absurd, she said finally, her laugh tight and unconvincing. Completely made up. I never said that. I expected that response, Judy said, her voice turning colder. Which is why I confirmed it. She nodded to the bailiff, who stepped forward and placed a small audio recorder on the bench. This, Judy continued, was submitted by the same HR director. A recording from that meeting. I reviewed it during the recess. Victoria's face drained of color. That's illegal. No, Miss Haynes. Judy cut in sharply. It is not, especially when recorded during a company-wide meeting in the state of California. She pressed play. At first, there was a murmur of voices. Then, clear and unmistakable, Victoria's own voice filled the courtroom, firm, commanding, and laced with authority. I am the system. I built this company. When I say something is done, it's final. I'm not asking for belief. I am belief. I am. The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed, hands flew to mouths, and even the cameraman hesitated before zooming in. Victoria stood frozen, watching everything unravel in real time. Turn that off, she suddenly shouted, slamming her hands on the table. That's being misrepresented. Sit down, Judy snapped. The command cut through the noise like thunder. For a moment, she just stared, jaw tight, breathing sharp. Then, slowly, she lowered herself back into her seat, stiff, controlled, and no longer as certain as before. Judy waited as the room settled into silence. Then she leaned forward, her gaze precise and cutting. "You know, Miss Haynes," she began, "I've encountered plenty of narcissists. People who believe they stand above the law, above honesty, above basic decency. But I've never seen someone so willing to document it themselves." Victoria tried to steady herself, but a tremor slipped into her voice. "Your Honor, that was motivational language. You're twisting it." "Stop," Judy said flatly. "You don't motivate people by tearing them down. You don't earn trust by declaring yourself divine. And you don't build loyalty by pretending to be God. That builds cults, not companies." The audience broke into applause before they could stop themselves. The bailiff called for order, but the shift in the room was already complete. Victoria glanced around, searching for support, first at the cameras, then at the audience, then finally at her assistant, who suddenly avoided eye contact. This wasn't a minor slip anymore. It was a collapse, and Judy was making sure it stayed that way. When the applause faded, it left behind a crushing silence. Judy leaned back, fingers steepled. "It always amazes me," she said calmly, "how people in power forget that evidence remembers far longer than ego." Victoria sat stiffly, her polished confidence beginning to crack. The composed image that carried her through boardrooms and interviews was gone. In its place was something far less controlled, fear masked as anger. "That recording proves nothing," she snapped, her voice rising. "It came from a disgruntled employee. People twist my words all the time. I'm a public figure. You should understand how the media distorts things." "Oh, I understand distortion very well," Judy replied, her tone sharp. "I just know the difference between distortion and documentation." She opened the manila folder that had been sitting beside her since the start. The audience leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. "Let's review what we have," she said, lifting the first page. "Exhibit A, an internal financial memo signed by you, dated 6 days after you terminated Miss Brooks. In it, you approved a 250,000 executive bonus for yourself." The color drained from Victoria's face. "That's standard compensation. Not when the money comes from the employee performance pool." Judy cut in, her voice firm. "The same pool that included Miss Brooks' unpaid bonus." Victoria tried to respond, but no words came. "Exhibit B," Judy continued, raising another document. "Whistleblower affidavit from your former CFO, who resigned 3 months ago. It outlines a pattern of financial manipulation, including misleading reports to investors." "He's lying," Victoria said quickly. "He was fired for incompetence." Judy's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, of course. "It seems anyone who tells the truth about you suddenly has performance issues." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room, but Judy remained focused. "Exhibit C, emails between you and your PR director discussing how to preemptively frame employee lawsuits as jealousy-driven attacks." Victoria's voice cracked. "Those were private strategy discussions. That's not evidence, that's business." Judy's voice softened, but it carried weight. "No, Miss Haynes. That's not business. That's deception. That's coercion. That's what happens when fear is mistaken for loyalty." Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "You don't understand what it takes to lead. You've never built anything." "Wrong," Judy fired back instantly. "I built an entire career holding people like you accountable." The courtroom erupted again, louder this time, and no one rushed to stop it. Judy allowed the noise to settle before continuing. "And finally, Exhibit D." She held up a flash drive, its metallic surface catching the light. "A digital archive of your company's internal Slack messages. It appears Miss Brooks wasn't the only one silenced for questioning your so-called authority." Victoria's breathing grew uneven. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it beneath the desk. "Those files were stolen," Judy corrected. "And verified. Every message, every deletion, every attempt to cover your tracks." The camera zoomed in as Judy leaned forward, her eyes locked in. "Tell me, Miss Haynes, how does it feel to realize the truth you thought you could rewrite comes with proof?" For a long, painful moment, Victoria said nothing. She stared at the documents as everything unraveled in front of her. The mask was gone. The image she had built cracked apart, revealing something far more fragile underneath. This is a setup," she whispered. "No," Judy replied evenly. "This is accountability. You can't intimidate reality into submission." "Not here. Not ever." Victoria's jaw trembled. "You don't understand. I am the system." Jody tilted her head slightly, studying her. "Then maybe it's time someone reset it." The audience burst into applause. Even the bailiff couldn't hide a small smile. Victoria's face flushed red as she gripped the edge of the desk. "You can't speak to me like that. I'm not one of your ordinary defendants. I'm Victoria Haynes." Judy struck the gavel once, the sound cutting through everything. "And I am the law in this courtroom." A silence followed, complete and absolute. The only sounds were Victoria's shallow breathing and the faint hum of the lights as the weight of judgment settled over the room. For the first time in her life, Victoria Haynes wasn't in control, and she knew it. Judy leaned back slowly, her expression impossible to read. "We'll move to closing statements shortly. But first," she paused, just long enough for the tension to tighten. "There's one more thing you need to see." She nodded to the bailiff, who tapped a control on the court monitor. The screen came alive. Victoria's expression shifted instantly, shock flashing across her face as security footage from her own company appeared. A boardroom meeting. She stood at the head of the table, her voice echoing through the speakers. "I don't need ethics approval. I am the ethics." That was it. The room reacted all at once. Gasps, whispers, cameras zooming in on Victoria's frozen expression. The flawless CEO facade shattered in real time. Judge Judy turned toward her, calm and composed. "Earlier you said you create your own truth," she said evenly. "Well, Miss Haynes, I hope you enjoy living in it, because what I see isn't truth, it's delusion." The studio lights felt harsher now, cutting through the silence like interrogation beams. The once unshakable presence of Victoria Haynes, the self-made icon, the untouchable visionary, was gone. Her designer confidence now looked like a burden. Her hands, once steady, trembled against the table. Judy let the silence stretch. She didn't need to speak. Silence did the work for her. When people believed they were invincible, silence forced them to hear the sound of their own collapse. Finally she spoke. "Miss Haynes." Her voice calm but piercing. "You've built a company. I'll give you that. You convinced investors to believe in you, employees to follow you, and the public to admire you. But all that power, all that money, it couldn't buy the one thing you clearly lack: integrity." Victoria looked up, her eyes glossy but still defiant. "Integrity," she scoffed. "Integrity doesn't build billion-dollar companies. Vision does." Judy raised an eyebrow slightly. "Vision without ethics is blindness, Miss Haynes, and you've been blind for a very long time." A murmur spread through the courtroom. At the plaintiff's table, Elena Brooks sat quietly, finally allowing herself a breath. But Judy wasn't done. "You stand here claiming divinity," Judy continued, leaning forward slightly, each word heavier than the last. "You tell people you control their success, that you decide their future. But real leaders don't demand worship. Real leaders don't silence the very people holding their company together." Victoria tried to cut in. "You're twisting." "Stop." Judy's voice cracked like a whip. "You've interrupted, deflected, and missiled since the moment you sat down. You think this is a performance? Fine. But understand this. The world is watching. And right now, what they see is not a visionary. It's a tyrant wrapped in ego and illusion." A wave of gasps rolled through the room. Victoria's face twisted between anger and humiliation. "You can't speak to me like that. I've been on magazine covers. I've been praised by presidents. You're just..." "Careful," Judy cut in, her tone suddenly icy. Victoria stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late she had stepped too far. Judy held her gaze. "You were about to say something revealing, weren't you? Go on. Finish it." Victoria swallowed, glancing around at the cameras, the audience, the walls closing in. For the first time, she looked small. "I was going to say, you're just television," she said finally, her voice tight. "Television," Judy repeated, almost amused. "That's right. Cameras everywhere. A record that doesn't disappear." She leaned forward, her voice lowering into that quiet, dangerous tone that signaled something final. "Do you know what happens to people like you on television, Miss Haynes?" she asked. Victoria didn't answer. "They become examples," Judy continued. "Examples of what arrogance looks like when it collides with truth, of what happens when power confuses itself with morality." She glanced briefly toward the plaintiff. "Miss Brooks, you believed in this woman. You gave her loyalty, you trusted her. And when you uncovered wrongdoing, she destroyed you to protect her illusion." Then Judy turned back to Victoria. "But today that illusion ends." Her gaze hardened. "I've seen people like you my entire career. People who think fear equals respect. People who believe success proves they're right. But the truth is much simpler, Miss Haynes. You're not a god." Her voice sharpened. "You're a frightened person in an expensive suit, terrified of the moment someone finally says no." Victoria's eyes burned. "You don't know me," she said, her voice shaking. "Oh, I do," Judy replied quietly. "I've seen hundreds just like you, and they all end up in the same place, alone, angry, and finally forced to face themselves without applause." The courtroom was completely still. Then Judy delivered the line that sealed it. "You can build empires on fear, Miss Haynes, but you cannot build respect. Fear fades, respect remains, and when the fear is gone, all that's left is the truth." Silence followed, deep and absolute. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether to move or simply hold the moment. Victoria sat motionless, her face drained of color. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Everything, her empire, her confidence, her identity, had unraveled in front of everyone. Judy leaned back, her tone returning to calm. "Now let's conclude this properly." For several long seconds, The only sound was the faint hum of the lights. The audience remained frozen as Victoria Haynes, the woman who once declared herself untouchable, began to fall apart. Her manicured hand reached for a glass of water. It slipped. The glass struck the desk with a sharp clatter, water spilling across the polished surface and soaking into her neatly stacked papers. The sound echoed like something breaking beyond repair. "Miss Haynes," Judge Judy said softly. Victoria didn't answer. She just stared forward, her eyes distant, unfocused. The hollow look of someone watching everything she built collapse in real time. Then came the first crack in her denial. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "You don't understand how the business world works. You can't destroy me with paperwork. I am Hans Dynamics." Judge Judy didn't react. She simply observed her, calm and steady, like a physician watching a patient finally break through a fever. Victoria suddenly stood, turning toward the cameras. "You think this will ruin me? I control media. I have influence. No one will believe this." "Sit down," Judy said firmly. But Victoria kept going, her voice rising between panic and anger. "Do you even know who I am? I could buy this entire production and replace you. You're nothing compared to me." A shocked murmur spread through the room. The bailiff instinctively stepped forward. Judy's voice dropped. Quiet, controlled, absolute. "Sit down." This time Victoria obeyed slowly, mechanically, like something inside her had finally given out. Her breathing turned shallow. The color drained from her face, leaving only exhaustion where arrogance once lived. "You built a company," Judy said evenly, "but you never built character. That's why everything is falling apart." The words hit harder than any gavel ever could. Victoria tried to respond, but her voice cracked. I was trying to build something bigger than myself," she whispered. Judy nodded slightly. "And in doing that, you forgot you were human." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything spoken before it. Victoria's eyes shimmered. The defiance that once defined her collapsed into something fragile and unfamiliar. "You don't understand," she said softly. "The pressure, the expectations, everyone waiting for you to fail." "I do understand," Judy replied. "The difference is I didn't let it turn me into someone like you." That was the final break. Tears spilled down Victoria's face, cutting through her makeup. She turned away from the cameras, burying her face in shaking hands. The audience, once eager for spectacle, now sat completely still. Even Elena Brooks looked conflicted, torn between relief and sympathy. "I just wanted respect," Victoria said through tears. Judy's voice softened but remained firm. "Respect isn't taken. It's earned. Fear doesn't create it." Victoria shook her head desperately. "I can fix this. I can rebuild." "No," Judy interrupted gently. "You can start over, but only after you tell the truth." The words landed like a final exposure of everything she had been avoiding. For a moment, Victoria just stared at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Then her voice broke completely. "I lied," she said faintly. "About the bonuses, about the reports, about everything." Judy nodded once. "Why?" Victoria swallowed hard. "Because I thought I could get away with it. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. And now," her voice trembled, "now I know I'm not." A low wave of murmurs passed through the courtroom. Cameras zoomed in as the once untouchable CEO sat exposed. No mask, no control, only truth. For years, Victoria Haynes had built her world on control and illusion. Now stripped of both, she was just another person facing the same reality. No one escapes accountability. Judy exhaled slowly. "That," she said, "is the first honest thing you've said since you arrived. Remember it." Victoria nodded weakly, still crying. Across the country, viewers watched in silence. The collapse of arrogance, the weight of truth, the fall of someone who once believed she was untouchable. But Judy wasn't finished. She lifted her gavel. "Now," she said calmly, "we conclude this matter." She adjusted her glasses. The room leaned in. Her voice turned precise, final, unmistakably judicial. "Victoria Haynes, this court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and your own admissions. What has been demonstrated here is not ambition. It is the misuse of power, the breach of trust, and the deliberate harm of those who believed in you." Victoria's breath hitched. She didn't wipe her tears anymore. Judy held the silence for a moment longer. Then, with steady certainty, she continued. "Judge Judy continued, you came into this courtroom expecting to win through intimidation. You believed money could bend reality. But in this courtroom, money has no voice. Only facts do, and the facts have already spoken." She paused, letting every word sink in. Each sentence felt like it was carved into stone. "This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Elena Brooks, for the full damages of $48,000, plus court costs and an additional $27,000 in penalties for willful retaliation and bad faith conduct." A wave of gasps swept through the courtroom. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, tears filling her eyes, not from the money but from validation. For the first time, her truth had been recognized. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. "A's for you, Miss Haynes," she said, turning toward the defeated CEO. "I am recommending that this full record, along with all submitted evidence, be forwarded to the Attorney General for a formal investigation into corporate fraud. Victoria froze. The color drained from her face as the cameras locked in on her. Eyes wide, lips parted, the realization setting in that this was far from over. Judy's voice remained steady. When power is used to silence truth, it doesn't just break contracts, it destroys trust. And once trust is gone, everything built on it collapses. The room sat in complete silence except for the faint hum of overhead lights. "Do you have anything to say before I finalize the ruling?" Judy asked. Victoria swallowed hard. Her voice barely came out. I don't know what to say." Judy gave a small nod. "Then I'll say it for you." She leaned forward slightly. "Power without humility becomes self-destruction. And you pressed that button the moment you believed you were untouchable." Murmurs spread through the audience. A few people even clapped before the bailiff quickly restored order. Judy wasn't performing. She was delivering a lesson. "You told your employees you were a god," she said. "But gods don't sit here and break down. Humans do. And that's what you are. Human, finally facing the weight of your own actions." Victoria lowered her head, shoulders trembling. The billionaire, the icon, the untouchable figure, now reduced to silence and tears in front of the world. Judy struck the gavel once. The sound hit like thunder. Judgment is entered for the plaintiff. Case closed. The courtroom erupted. Applause, shock, disbelief. Cameras zoomed in on Elena's relief and Victoria's empty stare. The bailiff moved to restore order, but the energy in the room had already shifted completely. Charged, emotional, final. As Victoria slowly stood, Jody delivered one last line. "You might want to learn how to serve something other than yourself, Miss Haynes. Because the higher the ego climbs, the harder reality brings it down." The gavel struck again. Elena quietly turned to Judy and whispered her thanks. Judy simply replied, "Don't thank me. Thank the truth. It always arrives, eventually." She rose and left the bench, leaving behind a courtroom still heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Within minutes of the broadcast, the moment exploded online. Clips of Judy's ruling spread across social media. Breaking millions of views in hours, headlines followed, reactions flooded in. The case became a global talking point. Inside Hands Dynamics, panic spread just as fast. The board convened emergency meetings. Investors pulled out. Stock values collapsed. Executives distanced themselves and internal documents began leaking to the press. The company unraveled in real time. Meanwhile, Elena's words in a post-trial interview quietly went viral. "Not for drama, but for honesty. I didn't want revenge," she said. "I just wanted truth, and what happened proved that no one is above accountability." In the months that followed, the company fell into bankruptcy. Assets were sold, leadership dissolved, and the once powerful empire faded into collapse. But something else emerged in its place. A wave of employees across industries speaking out under one shared message: accountability matters. Elena later founded a non-profit dedicated to protecting whistleblowers, built from support that poured in after the case. As for Judge Judy, she never spoke publicly about the ruling. But those close to the production later shared her quiet reflection after filming. "You can't fix people who refuse to see themselves. But you can make sure the world remembers what happens when they don't." By the end, the case wasn't just about a company or a courtroom. It became a warning etched into public memory, about power, truth, and consequences. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, one idea stayed behind: arrogance rises quickly, but reality always catches up.